British domination through revenue-generating laws. After the French and Indian War and Pontiac's War, the British government was deeply in debt. They had barely any money left to help govern the colonists. Also, the cost of governing the expanded colonial land was a lot. What little tax money was being collected in the 13 colonies was also being spent on the 13 colonies. So the British had to pay the additional cost of governing the new land gained from the French. The British also had to pay the continuing cost of keeping the British Army in the colonies to protect the colonists as they claimed more and more Native American land. Britain felt that it was only fair that the people in the 13 colonies helped solve this economic problem. Therefore, the British Parliament passed laws designed to bring in more money by collecting more taxes in the colonies. Britain had not directly taxed the colonists before. The earlier trade laws that helped Britain gain wealth from import and export taxes were collected mostly in Britain or from importers in Boston, New York, Philadelphia, or Charleston. Now, the British government needed even more money and passed new tax laws for the 13 colonies. Those new taxes would help pay for the cost of maintaining and defending the 13 colonies. Revenue-generating laws. The laws that the Parliament passed were revenue-generating laws. Revenue is another word for money taken in by the government. Generate is another word for raising or creating. So, revenue-generating laws raised money for the government by putting taxes directly on items. The revenue-generating laws were designed to make money for Britain to help pay the British debt from the French and Indian War, and to pay for the cost of defending the 13 colonies. 3 examples of revenue-generating laws were the Sugar Act, the Stamp Act, and the Townshend Act. Those revenue-generating laws were different than the earlier trade laws because they required the colonists to pay taxes in their own homelands. The earlier trade laws put taxes on trade goods coming in and out of Britain, but now the British government would collect more taxes in the colonies to generate revenue. The Sugar Act. The Sugar Act in 1764 was the first law passed by Parliament for the specific purpose of raising tax money within the 13 colonies. The Sugar Act added taxes to the sugar, wines, and coffee that colonists imported. When these items arrived in a colonial port, the colonists had to pay taxes to Britain. These taxes caused an economic problem for the colonies. How did the colonists get around the Sugar Act? By smuggling. Smuggling is secretly and illegally importing trade goods without the government knowing about it. To get around paying the Sugar Act taxes, some colonists started smuggling trade items. When the colonists smuggled sugar, wine, and coffee into the colonies, the smugglers did not pay the British government the import taxes that the Sugar Act said they should pay. The colonists who were smuggling could sell the sugar, wines, and coffee for less to other colonists, but still make money because the smuggled items did not have an import tax added to their price. While the colonial smugglers were able to make money, the British government did not collect much money, so Parliament needed to pass another tax law. The new tax law was called the Stamp Act. The Stamp Act. The Stamp Act required that the colonists pay a tax to Britain on all legal papers, such as wills and marriage certificates, and other printed things, such as newspapers, books, and even playing cards. The Stamp Act required that those items have a stamp on them to show that the tax had been paid. The stamp tax was the first tax directly on items other than trade goods. It was unpopular with the colonists because it was the first direct colonial tax on things that had nothing to do with trade. How the colonists got around the Stamp Act. What did they do? For the first time, all 13 colonies began cooperating. Colonial leaders began to say that Parliament had no right to tax the 13 colonies because the 13 colonies did not have any representatives or elected people in Parliament. Because the colonists did not have representatives who could vote on whether they wanted to pay taxes to Britain, the colonists felt they should not have to obey the Stamp Act. The colonists said no taxation without representation. Not being able to vote was a people's rights problem. Colonists did two things to get around the Stamp Act. First, some colonists formed groups to harass the stamp tax collectors so they could not do their jobs and would quit. The two groups were the Sons of Liberty and Daughters of Liberty. The Sons of Liberty were one of the first groups in which people from different colonies worked together. The Sons of Liberty were soon joined by a similar group composed of women called Daughters of Liberty. Sons and Daughters of Liberty groups were formed in all 13 colonies. Second, a group of colonial leaders met in New York in September of 1765 at a meeting called the Stamp Act Congress. The main purpose of the Stamp Act Congress was to get the Stamp Act repealed. Repeal means to cancel a law. The colonists wanted the British to cancel the Stamp Act in order to get the British government to repeal the Stamp Act. The Stamp Act Congress decided to boycott trade goods that required a tax stamp. A boycott happens when a group of people do not buy certain goods or services in order to make the government change a law. The colonial boycott worked very well. Because the boycott kept the British government from making much money on the law, and because the colonists were protesting so much, Parliament repealed the Stamp Act. They took it away. Because Britain still needed more money, Parliament had to pass another tax law, the Townshend Act. The Townshend Acts. The British government knew the colonists did not like to pay taxes directly to tax collectors, so Parliament passed the Townshend Acts, which tried to impose a hidden tax. Merchants were required to pay the taxes on imports before the goods and items were taken off the ship. The merchants included the tax they paid in the price they charged. The British government thought that because the taxes were included in the price of trade goods, the taxes would be hidden from the colonists. How the colonists got around the Townshend Acts. The hidden tax did not fool the colonists. Because the boycott had worked so well against the Stamp Acts, the colonists tried to boycott again. They refused to buy goods that the Townshend Acts taxed, like the Stamp Act, because the British government did not make money from the Townshend Acts, and the colonists protested. That law was also repealed. Summary. The British government had a problem. Britain needed to get more money to pay off their war debt and to pay for governing the colonies. The British government had a problem. Britain needed to get more money to pay off their war debt and to pay for governing the colonies. The British solution was for Parliament to pass revenue-generating laws such as the Sugar Act, the Stamp Act, and Townshend Acts. Because the colonists smuggled and boycotted goods being taxed, the laws did not work. Instead, the effect was the revenue-generating laws did not bring in enough money to solve Britain's economic problems, so the problem continued. Another effect was that the 13 colonies began cooperating to protest British laws. This became a new problem for the British.